Welcome to RECIPA, the Racial Equity Capacity in Practice Assessment. In this work, racial equity work, or anti-racist organizational transformation work, we commonly see two goals: a healthy climate inside the organization and organizational solutions that work for all of the organization's users, whether that's their customers, clients, patients, residents, constituents, or grantees. And we believe these two goals are deeply connected. You can't have one without the other. We believe meeting these goals will require capacity, knowledge, skill, and will, and putting this capacity into practice, putting it to use in our daily practices and processes. Capacity, knowledge, skill, and will, without putting it into practice, isn't going to materially change conditions for groups on the margins. And likewise, practice, just doing a list of things without the necessary capacity, also won't materially change conditions for groups. This is where RECIPA gets its name, Racial Equity Capacity in Practice. RECIPA is broken into 5 capacities, abilities, or competencies. These are useful for identifying your organization's greatest strengths and opportunities. RECIPA is also broken into 6 organizational practices. These are useful for pinpointing specific organizational processes, practices, policies, or norms to intervene on and change. On the left, you will see the theme being measured. This will be either an organizational capacity or an organizational practice. RECIPA uses percent favorable to generate scores. Percent favorable means the percent of respondents who rated the organization favorably. For example, a score of 95% on learning and improving would mean that 95% agree the organization continuously learns and improves. Where does the percent favorable score come from? Percent favorable comes from how respondents answer questions related to the theme. For instance, there are 16 survey items that make up the learning and improving score. Don't worry, later in the report we will break down this big theme into smaller parts. Capacity isn't an on and off switch, something the org has completely or lacks completely, and survey responses range from I strongly agree we have this capacity to I strongly disagree. Each choice makes up part of the overall score. If you choose strongly agree in the survey, your response is seen as 100% favorable. I somewhat agree corresponds to 75% favorable. I neither agree nor disagree corresponds to 50% favorable. I somewhat disagree is 25% favorable, and I strongly disagree corresponds with 0% favorable. Your org's scores are the average for all responses for that theme from all respondents. A higher score is shown as a longer bar. The longer the bar, the more favorable respondents rated the organization, and the more optimal workplace conditions likely are. 100% favorable means all agree we have this capacity, or all agree we do this practice well. A lower score is shown as a shorter bar. The shorter the bar, the less favorable respondents rated the org, and the less optimal workplace conditions likely are. 0% favorable means no one agrees we have this capacity, or no one agrees we do this well as a practice. Since 2014, when we launched RECIPA, no organization has ever received 100% overall, or on any individual capacity or practice, showing that no organization has yet achieved racial equity internally. And we are all working to solve a problem that has not been solved before. There is no book to read or case study to look to show us the path. Instead, we will have to chart our own path through deep inquiry, trying, failing, learning more about the system we seek to change, and trying again. We call this leadership. Your report will include similar charts for practices and capacities. Questions to explore as you review your results include the following. What are our greatest strengths? How optimal is the org in this area? What are our greatest opportunities? How suboptimal is the organization in this area? Which areas are most vital to our mission, values, and success? Your report includes a deep dive on each of the 5 capacities and 6 organizational practices. This breaks big themes like learning and improving into littler pieces. This makes it easier to drive deep inquiry, prioritize and plan your change effort, and design your interventions. Over time, you can also look at change from survey to survey to see if your interventions are working. In this dataset, learning and improving was the org's greatest strength. But we can see that the high score was really driven by a strength in increasing capacity. 76% agreed the organization sets goals related to racial equity, continuously learns, and increases its racial equity capacity in practice over time. And within this strength, there's also an opportunity. assessment. Only 56% agreed the organization regularly assesses its efforts for impact, evaluates its racial equity capacity in practice, and shares that evaluation with staff members and stakeholders. Questions to explore as you review your results include the following. What specific strengths could we leverage to accelerate organizational change? What specific area could we pinpoint for immediate intervention and improvement? Are there any contradictions, tensions, paradoxes between what was scored high and what was scored low? And if so, how do we explain these? Racial equity and broader DEI efforts are not about creating optimal conditions only for those in the majority. They are about creating an organization that works for all, solutions that work for all users. So when we assess racial equity capacity in practice, we need to understand how the organization is working for all groups. We do so by disaggregating results by different groups, including race, gender, and their intersections. The group furthest to the left scored the organization lowest and are least likely to have optimal conditions at work. The group furthest to the right scored the organization highest and are most likely to have optimal conditions at work. Here we see racial differences in how employees rated their organization's capacity. The hash mark at the top shows the overall score, which may not appear in the center of other scores because in most organizations, one or two racial groups make up the majority of the organization. A racial group is not visibilized on the chart when the number of respondents identifying this way is below the privacy threshold, which is set by your organization. We do this to protect employee privacy. If you are part of a group that is not visibilized in the data, please be assured your responses still have a big impact. They drive overall scores and they have an outsized impact on the race and gender disparity ratings, which we'll get to in a minute. Some reports include a gray box to show you the range of responses across different race and gender groups. This can be useful when N counts are low in some groups and high in others. One question we get is, well, if N counts are low, should we doubt these scores or should we disbelieve the race and gender disparities that are shown? No, actually the opposite. Each theme is made up of between 5 and 50 questions. If race and gender was insignificant, we would see groups shuffle from most favorable to least favorable across different items. And in average, we would see little to no race and gender variance. But it is common to see clear race and gender disparities persist across capacities and across practices, and to notice patterns emerge in who the organization is most tuned for and who is least likely to have optimal workplace conditions. Questions to explore as you review your results include the following. Find yourself and how you identify. How do people like you rate the organization? How close to optimal is the organization for people like you? Which groups are closest to yours, meaning they are experiencing the most similar conditions to your own group? Who is furthest, experiencing the most different conditions at work? What are the stories beneath the data? What practices, processes, policies, and norms drive these differences in conditions? If you are not visible in the data, what is that experience like? Does this in any way reflect your day-to-day experiences in the organization? How does invisibility play out in the organization? What causes it, and what is its impact on you and the organization's work? Some reports also rank themes from smallest to largest range. At the top is the theme with the smallest range, less difference in how respondents rated the organization. At the bottom is the theme with the largest range in responses across lines of race and gender, more difference in how respondents rated the organization. RECIPA also includes subthemes ranked by favorability and disparity. On the left, subthemes are ranked by favorability. Subthemes at the top were most likely to be rated favorably. On the right, subthemes are ranked by race and gender disparity. Subthemes at the top had the lowest differences across race and gender, meaning that respondents were more likely to rate the organization similarly, regardless of race or gender. In either column, items toward the top are greater strengths, while items at the bottom are opportunities for improvement. Here are some questions to explore as you review your results. Compare items near the top and bottom of a column. Are there any contradictions, tensions, or paradoxes? And if so, how do you explain these? Are there any items that are on the top of the left column, but the bottom of the right column? If so, it's likely the group with the most optimal conditions is also the group in the organizational majority. What must we do to improve conditions for those on the margins? What responsibility do people in the majority have to bear the burden of this change work, to personally change and shift, to change organizational processes and practices they like, prefer, or benefit from? RECIPA also includes a top 20% report. These are the individual survey items that respondents scored the organization most favorably on. And a bottom 20% report. These are the individual survey items that respondents scored the organization least favorably on. As you engage in deep inquiry, compare your top 20 and your bottom 20 items. Are there any contradictions, tensions, or paradoxes? If so, how do you explain these? The report concludes with an item-by-item report. At any time, if you are curious how a theme or sub-theme is defined, or what survey items went into scoring it, go to the item-by-item report. Here we see the theme, justice orientation, and 3 of its 5 sub-themes. You can see each survey item related to each theme, ordered from most favorable to least. Thank you for using the Racial Equity Capacity and Practice Assessment to identify your organization's strengths and opportunities, prioritize change efforts, design and execute interventions, and evaluate your efforts. We recommend completing the survey annually or at least every 18 months to measure your progress over time.